Hello, everyone, friends, followers, subscribers around the world. We are in another episode of Conversation of Power. And in today's conversation, we are going to discuss with my guest the Japan situation after the post-war order, especially from how the Southeast Asian and ASEAN countries sees. And most recently, as you know, there was a snap election in Japan, and the current Prime Minister Sana Takaichi win the election decisively. Through the historic basis and developments of Japan, it is relations with the region, it is alliances, and everything we will try to bring on the table and discuss the topic. I'm today joining by my valuable guest, Dr. C.Chang from Malaysia,
Hello.
and we will look at to the situation. And welcome, Peter. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Lokman. Good to have you here. Good to have joining you in this virtual space.
Thank you very much, Peter. And uh, there is a snap elections, and Prime Minister Senator Takaichi win decisively these elections. Just I want to make a connection between this and the historical point. So how do you see the Senator Takaichi's landslide victory in the recent slap election can reshape Japan's strategic role, especially in the post-Western global order, specifically in balancing its alliances, economic policies, and contributions to multilateral framework across the Asia-Pacific and specifically ASEAN and Southeast Asian region? What will be your take on this hot developments?
Okay, let me just give a quick take, and then through the hour we can elaborate on some of the points. And this is a historic election result for Japan for the LDP. I think this is the biggest majority they have had in their history, and it's quite, as you said, rightly put, very convincing, and a lot of people say it's a landslide victory. And it has a lot to do with Sane Takahashi herself as a personality, as a politician who has proven to be very effective in tapping into the sentiments on the ground and to rally the people, the voters, to her cause. And it's historic in many ways. It's historic in the sense that LDP won a super majority, but on the international stage as well, it is historic in the sense that it is almost like a decisive shift from the center towards the right. And Japan has clearly, through this overwhelming and emphatic victory, showed themselves and voiced up themselves that they are very concerned on certain issues and they want to shift Japan's orientation towards the right. And that has got implications on how Japan is going to react to the post-Western order that we've been talking about. Famously, breaking news 2 weeks ago when Mark Carney announced at Davos, the World Economic Forum, that the Western world that we knew for almost 80 years is now gone. It's no longer there. Don't pretend. And a lot of people actually do believe that, in large part because of U.S. American Trump himself, who chooses to withdraw. So we are in this moment right now, in the post-Western world moment, and many of the U.S. allies are realigning themselves, and they are realigning themselves in many different ways. Japan, through this election, is clearly sending an indication that they are going to realign in a way that is going to be quite different from some of its traditional allies in the West. And I think they're going to continue to align themselves with the United States, even though the post-Western world is no longer there. America doesn't want to lead it anymore. But I think that Takashi's administration is going to see US as a very, very important partner for them in navigating this new terrain as they face a lot of uncertainties, especially its relationship with China. Uh, as with regard to ASEAN itself, ASEAN in general has been very, very uh, has found the relationship with Japan as a very robust, very strong, especially at the economic level. Japan has played such a critical role in helping Southeast Asia to develop ourselves through the 60s, 70s, 80s. Uh, Through industrialization, Japan as an economic power was instrumental in helping us to reach where we are. But now Japan's role has been eclipsed in some ways at the economic realm by China. And then the rise of China have shaped the dynamics, the landscape of ASEAN. And it also affects Japan's relationship with ASEAN. So a lot of things is remains uncertain. The future is all the pieces as beginning to move. Where it's going to fall, we are not exactly sure. But the results on Sunday is truly historic and is going to uh, have a lot of impact and significance on how Japan relates itself to ASEAN, to China, and to the rest of the world.
In the context of the evolving international dynamics, so what strategic adaptations in Japan can undertaken in its foreign relations, and how could these adaptations open pathways for deeper collaborations with someone rising China in the region and regional platforms like ASEAN to promote shared prosperity in the region, because we know that the region already has some frictions through the South China Sea, territorial borders, and there is a Taiwan issues. There is so many complex issues in this region. How Japan can manage these complex relations?
Yeah, Japan has various ways that various administrations have taken on various approach to deal with the tension in the region. This tension in the regions are not new, but it's come into focus for to the forefront because different administrations has taken different approach. Some are more diplomatic. Trump wants to take a more engaging approach vis-a-vis China. Some has chosen like the Takachi's administration, a more confrontational, a more direct, in a strong Japan approach towards the contestation. So I think the Takashi's administration, with this very overwhelming endorsement mandate from the Japanese voters, uh, thinks that so, so she may get the impression that she's got a mandate to continue this much more hawkish and hardline approach towards dealing with the tension that Japan has with China. So I think if that is the case, it's just going to take that as a mandate to continue that approach, then we were probably going to see a lot more sort of hard pushback between the two neighbors, between the two ASEAN neighbors, China and Japan itself. That will not be conducive, I think, not only for the two countries, but also for the rest of the region as well, especially in Southeast Asia. So at the economic level, as it is, we are already say sort of suffering a lot of so going through a lot of upheaval because of U.S. Donald Trump's unilateral tariffs. Malaysia and ASEAN in general are trying to cope with the impact of those tariffs. So if we have an increased tension between China and Japan, and that would add another layer of uncertainty and frictions and difficulties for us to cope on the economic front. For example, rare earth has got into the crosshair of this tension. Rare earth has already mainly been spoken of in terms of U.S.-China relationship. But rare earth has been used by the Chinese against the Japanese themselves. The Japanese themselves also feel a bit vulnerable by this the rare earth that the Chinese could use could they want to use on. So there are a lot of other examples where the supply chains could be affected by the tension between the two neighbors. Then there is, of course, the security, the military dimension, where there is a more increased focus on Japan now tends to see everything through the lens of security, unfortunately. Even economics is itself, supply chains and others is seen through the lens of security, how to secure our national interests rather than common prosperity and that kind of thing. And then, of course, the territorial, Taiwan, and now they are also engaging with the Philippines in terms of joint patrols and defense compact. So China, Japan has over the past 4 or 5 decades since the war, Second World War, has always had very strong presence, but it's mainly economic presence. It's a very benign and constructive soft power presence. But over the last decade or two, because of security concern, its presence has now becoming more militarized, more defense focused. So this is a shift, I think. I hope we do not really have to go further down that path. I think it will be destabilizing. It will put in another layer of tension to a global situation that is already quite volatile. So the Japan, China sort of tension has got spillover effect. It does affect us in Southeast Asia as well. I hope that the Japanese would take a little bit more pragmatic approach that you would want to cause, confront where you think confrontation may be needed or harder stance, but also open the door for engagement, really open the door to want to have opportunities for cooperations with China. It doesn't have to be a completely zero sum relationship. There are areas in which Japan and China can really cooperate that can benefit not only for themselves but for the greater good. The environmental challenges is one example. The green economy. Security doesn't have to be all about territorial or borders. Security could be about fighting climate change, that sort of thing. So I do hope that the new administration, Takashi's administration, would not be overwhelmingly focused on the more narrow understanding of security and wanting to take a more hawkish stance against some of its neighbors, but rather be open to more explore areas of cooperations and coexistence.
And you depict the Japan's through the history very nice. So, what underlying factors are influencing Japan's strategic choice, specifically amid the shifts in traditional US-led international order or regional order? And do you think what ways might this choice encourage broader regional dialogue, stability, and cooperative initiative, and bring Japan back, as you said initially? Japan's what as benign power and constructive, especially towards the ASEAN countries, like the constructions, investment, and maybe education and health as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Lokman, I think the main factor that influenced Japan's foreign policy right now is undoubtedly the rise of China. The rise of China has completely changed um, post-World War
Calculations.
to Japan's worldview. After the Second World War, Japan, under the US umbrella security cover, really blossomed, really sort of built itself up. And Japan really advanced and grew. And peacetime Japan, there was peacetime Japan for almost 4 decades, continuous growth until the 90s and the first decade of the 20th. It was just a fantastic time for Japan, I think, becoming the world's second biggest economy after the US. It's just amazing. But then the rise of China changed that, both at the economical level. China superseded now Japan as the economic powerhouse. Japan
China
used to
replaced.
drive the economic growth of Southeast Asia. Now it's China that drives the economic growth in Southeast Asia.
I said the China replaced it as a second world most powerful GDP.
I think
Previous
so.
was,
I think so.
yes,
Yeah.
previous was Japan, but
Japan,
now number two is China.
oh, is that right? Okay. Then the other thing is, of course, the rise of China is the major factor that shapes Japan's foreign policy, and it's also because the unresolved historical grievances relating to World War II is the other factor, and that it complicates Japan's now have to worldview or foreign policies entirely, completely consumed by this rise of China and its unresolved World War II reckoning between the two countries. They have got unresolved scores between the two countries on how World War II was lost and World War II was won. So the Chinese clearly have got a lot of grievances on their side, and the Japanese seems to have their own sort of views of how the World War II history should be reckoned with. So that really shapes, completely colors Japan's foreign policy. The other second factor, key factor, I think, is the US itself. Over the last few years, especially with the Trump administration, it really shakes the Japanese out. Yeah. Japan can maintain its pacifist constitution, which they signed after the Second World War. Part of their terms of surrender is that they have to remain pacifists. Was because there was one condition was that the Americans would provide the military cover umbrella. So they do not really have to worry about being threatened by an external power or neighboring power as long as the Americans have the umbrella over them. So that was it. They were able to maintain the pacifist constitution, just focus on coast guards, minor self-defense kind of work, and then just building up its economy. And now suddenly the umbrella is removed and it's taken. And you can understand how difficult it is for them to, and it is not just the Japanese who are going through this trauma, but the Europeans themselves, the Germans and the French, with NATO collapsing, the security umbrella no longer there. There's a lot of anxiety among the former US allies or US, soon to be former US allies, and Japan is one of them. And they have to recalibrate. How are they going to, now that there's that security umbrella is no longer there, how are they going to defend themselves? Is there a threat? So those are real anxiety. So I think the two factors that consumes the Japanese right now is both the two giants, China and the US. But my own feeling is that Japanese they have legitimate concern. It is understandable why they are very anxious about a post-US, post-Western world order, because that order has been beneficial to them. That order really provided them some levels or layers of protection. Now that protection is gone. And now, obviously, when it's no longer there, your most first instinct is to build your own defense, which is what understandably what they are doing right now. They're going to increase their defenses. They're going to strengthen navy, their armies, and all those things. But my own advice to them is that this uncertainty should not just be focused on military. You mustn't just focus to defend yourself, just building up, spending more on defense and military, and taking a martial approach, a military approach to protecting yourself. You got to have a much more comprehensive approach dealing with the uncertainties that you have. Sure, you have got territorial disputes with some of your neighbors, with South Korea or with China, but you want to take a holistic, you want to also consider a diplomatic solution to it. You want to also consider that there are other common areas, common good, or common sort of aspiration that we have that we can work on. It doesn't have to be entirely about security, about territorial, about national sovereignty. There are so many other areas in which the Japan's relationship with the region can be built on. Yeah, I think as you mentioned, previously Japan's relationship with the region was completely non-security, non-military. And then suddenly they make a swing, focus almost not entirely, but predominantly on military and security. But I think the best way for them is to really strike a balance. They continue to engage us economically, do soft power engagement, people cultural, yeah, at the same time building up your security bit by bit without threatening, quote unquote, because of historical reasons. Some of us still feel threatened with a very strong Japanese military because some of us have got fresh memory of World War II when Japan conquered not only China, Korea, Taiwan, but also Southeast Asia, colonized us. And it was a very difficult period for many of us who went through. It was very brutal. So we still have memories of that. So if Japan were to go full out and to rearm themselves, and there's even talk of acquiring nuclear capability, it will be very, very dangerous, very destabilizing for the region. I just hope that the leadership will take a much more holistic and comprehensive approach to deal with the uncertainties that is happening right now in the post-West US world order. It is a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of risk and danger. But let's not just focus on the military side, but also be open to engagement where there is common good. And especially on the economic side, where Japan has done a fantastic job for Southeast Asia and should continue to do that in ways that they have proven to be very good at.
And Peter, since we are talking about the historical connections, just let me go a little bit details. How can lessons from the historical World War II connections can guide Japan toward forging more robust and mutually beneficial growth relationship with its neighbors and enhancing collective growth like the cultural exchange and diplomatic harmony, like the in a way that China talking about harmony in today's global environment.
Yeah, Japan has got a lot of experience. As I said already, right at the outset, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Japan has got fantastic experience helping us in Southeast Asia to build. Japan Inc., INC Inc. came in. They built up factories, Toyota, Honda, Mitsubishi, Sony in the 70s and 80s. They were very, very, they had a very energetic and synergy with Southeast Asia. That's why the Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong was just saying in the backdrop of the tension between China and Japan, and says that Southeast Asia actually had benefited a lot from Japan's engagement with us, and maybe China could learn to coexist. with the Japanese. We had got good experience coexisting with the Japanese, so they had. But things have changed. For some reason, they lost their footing. They became very anxious about security. They want to securitize everything. So I would encourage my Japanese friends is that to continue to engage us economically, just to ensure there are security concerns, continue to invest in people's to people's collaboration. There used to be a lot of exchange between Japanese universities and us as well, but now it has been eclipsed by China. Obviously, there is a competition, but that doesn't mean the game is over for you guys. Japan can still be a participant. It will be a little bit more competitive now because China's soft power is also increasing in this part of the world. But Japan still has a lot of people in Southeast Asia still have a soft spot for Japan. Japan Inc. still carries a fairly relatively positive image in Southeast Asia, and they should build on that, build on multilateral collaboration. But the thing is, ASEAN is neutral. We really do not want to choose sides. Really, Southeast Asia in general has always maintained a non-aligned principle of non-partisan neutrality. We want to engage with every extra-regional external powers that's come through us. And we do not want to be forced to choose sides. So that's why, for example, when the US-China rivalry came into play about 10 or 20 years ago, we made it clear to the Americans we do not want to choose sides. The Americans will just say that, it's either us or them. It's either liberal democracy, the free world, or the authoritarian, tyrannical world. You got to choose who you want to align with. But Southeast Asia has always felt very uncomfortable being put in that position. And I can tell you the Chinese understands. The Chinese will tell us that no, you don't have to choose sides. Malaysia, you can trade with us, you can have economic ties with us, and you can have ties with the United States as well. By all means, we are not asking you to choose sides. The only thing we do not want is that you align with somebody against our interests. If you work with America against our interests, China's interests, then we will object to that. Other than that, if you work with America for your own good, not against us, that is fine, by all means. But Americans don't see it that way. Here is where I kind of worried that Japan might fall into that trap. That as Japan comes in, and sometimes Japan sounded like a game, like asking us to choose sides. If we are the coalitions of the willing. We are for this, for that. The other side is not for this, for that. We are different. So I think that will be difficult for us. I mean, ASEAN will feel uncomfortable if Japan plays that same card that the US plays, that, we are the free world, we are liberal democracy, the other side is not, they are, authoritarian. Uh, you choose us rather than them and work with us rather than them. If it is a zero sum of formulation of that kind of cooperation, then it would not be good. So my advice to my Japanese counterpart is that continue to engage us, but continue to engage us in an open way. There will be competition. There will be competition between sides, but if it is economic, then let it be economic. But don't try to divide it along ideological side, like the free world against the non-free world, the West against the East, and that sort of thing. The global South and global North kind of divide is not helpful.
No, Peter, we you made it the comparison between the US, China, Japan, and let's little bit go to the history. If we examine the parallels between the policy defense, especially in terms of the security, the policy defense evolutions, Japan and Germany, just there is a two example. What innovative strategies can Japan implement to strengthen its security architecture, drawing on global best practices? and to support peaceful development and international partnership. And specifically, what will be the request of the Southeast Asian nations in these terms from Japan?
Okay, a couple of things. Germany, as you rightly raised in your question and assumption that Germany is also going through this period of remilitarization, and because of their own, like Japan, of their World War II legacy, they were so traumatized. The German societies has been so traumatized, much more, even more so than the Japanese, I think. A lot of us felt that the Germans have really, really come to a really honest reckoning that Nazism is evil. They should never happen. It should never happen again. Germany should never embrace that again. So they have come to this very difficult moment where, because of Russia and also because of the retreat of the US, the Germans really did not really want to cross this bridge, but they really felt that they got no choice. They have to now think that they might have to become military powerful again. You know, of course, some of the neighbors will have some reservations about it, but the Germans themselves don't feel comfortable uh, becoming strong military again because of their own historical past. So Madrid, the current chancellor has passed a very powerful, a huge defense bill recently, I think. But he represents a center-left government. Okay. Now there's concern that not all Germans have got the same kind of reservation about Nazism. The ADF has begun to emerge. The far right is already at the wing. Elon Musk is openly supporting far right, complaining that the freedom of speech has been censored in the West because the far right is not going to be given there is a real possibility that the far right could win an election just like in Japan. So there's this real concern within Germans right now. The current increase in spending is led by a center-left government that is very, very weary about wanting to rearm themselves. But the right, which is not in political power right now, have got less reservation. And when they do come into power, the Germany will be a different kind of Germany that is military powerful. So that is one take I want to say. But what I want to say is that in Japan, the really militarization is already engineered by the far right. Unfortunately, Takaichi's administration and coalition has got individuals and leaders that are very, very sympathetic towards the far right view of the world, and who that tends to downplay World War II atrocities and wants to make Japan great again in a Japanese version that goes back to its pre 1945 military strength. And that is very worrying, I think. So if as I said earlier on, there's a need for defense because of the umbrella is no longer there. But if it is taken under a worldview which is deny the history of World War II, then it will be very dangerous for us. Now, having said that, now that I've laid this out, I just want to say that in what ways, if there is a need indeed to have increased strengthen of defense between regions. For Southeast Asia, as I said before, if Japan wants to strengthen military ties with us, we have always, again, as I said, maintained a multilateral open engagement. Malaysia has got naval exercises with both the United States and China, and even Russia. We are not military aligned to any one or the other. So we want to strengthen our defenses. Let's do it. If we want to do it, then we have as inclusive as other. We are not going to have military exercises, joint patrols, and all those things against one or the other. So that is again, I think if Japan wants to do that, and if it wants to build up its own defenses and form military defenses alliances, it's best to for confidence building for regional good that it is done as at the most multilateral level, as more partners as possible, as more as inclusive as possible, rather than framing it as one against the other, trying to paint one neighbor as the enemy against the rest. And that will be very counterproductive. That will probably breed a lot more mistrust and distrust in the region. So my own take is that again, it has to take on from the ASEAN perspective, ASEAN neutrality, uh, ASEAN inclusiveness, ASEAN openness. Economically, we want to trade with everybody. Militarily, in terms of engagement, we want to work together with everybody as well.
And now, Peter, you talking about the inclusiveness and openness of Asia, and in terms of the Southeast Asian countries' relations with Japan, there is an important connections. The integration of foreign workers. I think in that case, Southeast Asia has a good connections with Japan, sending the workforce to Japan. And in that case, as Japan expand its integration on these foreign workers, how can effectively multilateral strategies and foster greater social unity, innovation, and long-term economic vitality while addressing workforce needs in a globalized world?
Japan, like most other European and advanced economy, has aging demographic. So Japan is aging, and the younger populations are not supplanting the older generation. Then there's a shortage of workforce. So over the last 2, 3 decades, they like much of Europe or the Western economies, they are dependent on migrant workers. So migrant workers are in Japan and increasingly more. And as in Europe as well, so there is a little bit of a social sort of a backlash, not very familiar with having people of a different linguistic background or cultural and religious background in the neighborhood. When it was certain level, numbers is fine, but then it's reached a certain threshold, and people begin to feel uncomfortable. So immigration has become a big issue, as in America and in the West. And immigration was a hot topic in the election. The anti-immigration sentiment was very strong, and Takashi's and her conservative coalitions played on it and really stirred it up, and it really mobilized. It was a very effective political formula. It won. It really pushed the tide. As I say, if Takashi's landslide victory was driven by two things. One is his anti-China stance. They are really fearful of the rise of China. So a lot of Japanese young ones as well rally behind her. And the other issue that really galvanized and mobilized and energized the votes for Takashi is the anti-immigration issues. So we are seeing that happening right now. So I'm not too sure exactly. I think Japan will still need immigrants, but I think there will be lesser effort to have a lesser dependent on them. They will try to reduce them as much as they can. And then yeah, there is this effort to make Japan Japan again, just like the Americans. They said America has to be white and Christian again. So there is this movement right now in Japan as well. There is Japan Japan again. So that sort of thing. So this is going to play out. The reality is that these are real problem. These are real social economic problem with migration, you know. But of course, I'm not too sure whether you follow the news in Europe. Spain came out and says that, we are quite different from the rest of Europe. We are very happy and open. We see migrants as a net positive for us. Sure, there are some challenges, but overall, migrant has been a net positive for Spain, and we embrace migrants in Spain. Obviously, for us in Southeast Asia who are inclusive, who opens, we want to see that kind of much more positive outlook on that. We also recognize in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, we also have our own different, smaller, different scales of migrant tensions as well. But we want to see the bigger picture that overall the net benefit is that it will benefit both the migrants and the host community as well. So I think Japan is going through this period right now. There's the rising xenophobia of migrants and immigrants of different background and different races, and that plays into it, and it's become a very powerful political tool. Moving forward, I think Japan is probably going to be a lot more conservative. They're going to rely less, close the doors. There's a backlash on their tourism. Their tourism is booming so much, but there are so many foreigners visiting their towns in the summer that they overwhelm them. They just felt that their home is no longer Japan because there are so many foreign tourists flooding all the streets and everything. So there's this pushback right now. So Japan is going through that period, I think. But every society, every culture, every country goes through that moment. There will be moments where we are a lot more open. There will be moments where we draw back in. But let's hope that, this is just a transitional period, just a temporal closing in, and then Japan will open up again. But I can tell you that ASEAN in general is very pluralistic. We are much more comfortable because of historical reasons and other historical forces, colonization and colonialism and others. We are very mixed. We got Asians from every parts of the world in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia. Lokman, you were in Malaysia before, you know what the experience is. It is not completely without friction. It is not completely without tension. But overall, the picture has been very pluralistic. We want to try to maintain, to open up the door to as many as possible. Uh, I think there are some challenges we face, but in a global village, that's the way to go. I think in a global village, we have to learn to live with one another. Building up walls, drawing up the drawbridge, building up fences is just a temporary solution. You're going to lose out eventually. I think the longer term is really to open up and to embrace the other. There will be some pains, there will be some challenges, but I think in the long run and overall, it is a net benefit to embrace the other, to embrace pluralism.
And now, Peter, inspired by successful models of regional coexistence, so how do you think Japan's transition from primarily economic investments to comprehensive security partnerships, such as with the Philippines, and unreached balance growth, like technological collaboration and mutual benefits in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, it's a very difficult challenge right now. We are going through this transition. Japan has always been an economic power. It doesn't really need to worry too much about security. But now we are going through the transition, which I think they need to, because of reasons I already given, because of the rise of China and the US retreat. They cannot ignore security and defense, so they have to integrate that. But we don't have to do it either or. We don't have to say that it's just focus on economic or military or defense. We can have both, but not exclusively, not one over the other. I think Japan will continue to take on Japan's presence in Southeast Asia now, as already is with the Philippines. will have a stronger, more pronounced defense, security, and military component to it. Uh, we will probably have to get used to it, unfortunately. We are not used to it. Some of us in Southeast Asia are still not used to a strong military Japan because of our memories of World War II. We are much more comfortable with a Japan that comes in suits and ties, that drives, that sells to us Toyota rather than the tanks. But anyway, the reality is that we probably see Japan playing a more defense security sort of card in our relationship. But I hope it can be a little bit more balanced and that it can be constructive. That even as they move on that way, they will continue to invest in diplomacy, in people's to people's uh, relationship. And most importantly, I think they have to find a way to build good relationship with China. The kind of hardline, confrontational approach towards China is not helpful because for us, Southeast Asia, we are caught in the middle because we want to be friends with both. We have got very, very good historical relationship with Japan, but we have got increasingly vital relationship with China. We just cannot afford to choose between the two. You know, if Japan gets into a difficult time with China, then we are put in a very awkward position. We don't really want to choose between the two. But it can't, worst come to worst, we probably have to choose. And then we might, I got a feeling because of the China's, how integral China is now to our economic well-being, we may have to go with China rather than Japan. So we don't really want to be put in that position. So I really hope that the Japanese will, as they shift their focus towards defense and security and military, they mustn't neglect the economic, the soft power, the diplomacy, the people-to-people engagement. And then the third thing is try to be as inclusive, as open as possible. Try to strike a much more pragmatic, cooperative relationship with China. The kind of hardline hawkish approach towards China is not going to help. I don't think it's going to solve uh, Japan's problem. It's probably going to cause a lot of wider regional repercussion, and for us in Southeast Asia as well.
And now, Peter, with China increasingly positioned as a central force for the global and power and stability in the post-Western world, how do you see Japan develop synergetic partnerships that integrate economic opportunities with the joint security efforts and benefiting the wider Asia Pacific and again Southeast Asian region?
Yeah, China has been amazing. The Belt and Road Initiative has been, since its launch almost like 15 years ago now, 10 years ago, 15 years. Oh, it started with Southeast Asia, then it's moved to the rest of Asia, and it's gone to Africa, now it's gone to Latin America and Eastern Europe. It's historic. The Belt and Road Initiative is historic. And then President Xi Jinping came up with the three initiatives: Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative, and then the fourth one, Global Governance Initiative. These are China's quote unquote, they call it international public good. This is how they feel is their contribution as a citizens of the global community. China wants to help to build a much more fairer, how from their perspective, which also very much resonate with the global south perspective, a fairer, more equitable economic order. And by and large, they have delivered. A lot of member states in the global south, in South Asia, who participated in the BRI and others, has experienced growth. There are some exceptional, some projects did not quite work out as planned, but overall, it has been a positive good. Japan can be part of that movement. Japan really should tap into that. For the longest time, because Japan and the rest of the West were aligned in this, bipolar world, the West and the rest, the global North and the global South, the liberal free world against authority. So they did not want to have any role part to play in this China-led initiative. But as Mark Carney just said, you know, that Westerner order is no longer there. It has actually never been fair. But we participated in it because it benefited us. But now it's no longer benefited us, so we don't want to be part of it anymore. Canada says we don't want to be part of it anymore. And what? He visited China before the Davos. And then after that, Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister, visited. Prior to that, uh, Macron from France visited. Ireland's president visited. Lots of European Western leaders are visiting China now, building bridges, economic bridge, to hedge against the United States. They realize that, the uncertainty. China now is a stabilizing force in this very fragmenting world. The world is being, at this moment as we talk, the world is fragmenting. And it is dangerous the way in which it is being fragmented. We are in this moment, transitional moment, which is very dangerous. And China is the stabilizing force, trying to hold things together. Japan can do that. Japan can follow the other Western allies and friends and say that, we do not have to uh, get ourselves out of this. What I think is a global good, and Japan should engage China. I really think that this is why I just say that the Takashi's hawkish and sort of confrontational stance is counterproductive. It's going against the global tide. The global tide is that countries now, not just the global south, but countries in the global north are recognizing that Beijing has a role to play. They are visiting Beijing. Yet Tokyo, Takashi is the odd one out who doesn't want to visit, doesn't want to engage in a constructive relationship with China. I think Japan has got enormous potential to help us build a common good. They have got super technology in AI, microchips, and others. Their engineering is world class. If they were only willing, already prepared to work alongside with their Asian neighbor China, it could serve enormous good, not only to the two countries, to the region, but also to humankind.
Peter, as the patterns of the US influence continue to transform the region, how can Japan's initiative to bolster its self-defense capabilities align with ASEAN's fundamental principles such as the peace, neutrality, and thereby to contributing to sustain the regional harmony and cooperative security? How they can solve this dilemma?
What's the dilemma again, Lokman? Can you remind me?
I said, in one hand, there is a US influence to continue to transform the region. And how can Japan's initiatives to bolster its self-defense capabilities in way to align with ASEAN's fundamental principles like peace, of neutrality, and thereby contributing to the sustained regional hegemony, harmony, and cooperative security?
Yeah, I think, yeah, ASEAN, as I mentioned earlier on, the foundational principle of ASEAN is neutrality and centrality. Centrality means that for us, ASEAN, Southeast Asia, we are very concerned. If there is anything or issues or disputes that will shape the state, the destiny of ASEAN, we want to be at that table in which the decisions of the future, the fate of ASEAN is decided. We do not want the fate of ASEAN, Southeast Asia, to be decided in The Hague, in Washington, in Beijing, or in Moscow. That is the principle of ASEAN centrality. ASEAN says that, our fate must ultimately lies in our own hand. We do not want to become pawns of superpowers. We do not want to become a proxies of a Cold War between China and the US, or China and Russia, or whatever, US and Russia. So for us, that's very key. As long as Japan, I think Japan recognizes that, and Japan doesn't really want to undermine our own sense of sovereignty, our own sense of centrality. Then we will obviously have a lot of room for that kind of military cooperation. That is one of the pillars of our own security architecture arrangement. As long as, so when we make alliances and others, we just want to make sure that we don't become proxy. We don't want to be used by others to fight someone else's war, or we don't want to be used by others to do their fighting in our neighborhood. So for example, in the South China Sea, there is real concern that it could be turned as a theater for a proxy war, great power war between China and the US, and which will be detrimental for the region. We are very fearful that we could be used as a theater, as it was the Vietnam War. In some ways was like that. It was a proxy war for the broader Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. And we suffered enormously. And we do not want to see that happen again. So it's very crucial. So one way in which we can ensure that our ASEAN centrality is preserved is to reaffirm constantly ASEAN neutrality. That we will want to tell any countries who want to partner us either economically or militarily that we are open. We will be open to procuring equipments from anyone that we think serves our interests, serves the region's interests. We will do joint practices, joint naval exercises with anyone we think serves our national interest, serves our regional interest. Again, we got to impress upon the Japanese friends that is core ASEAN principle of centrality and neutrality. That we will be friends. We will be friends with you in Japan, but we will also be friends with our friends in China as well. We will work together with them. We really do hope that Japan and China will get along in every space, including the military.
And Peter, by upholding and enhancing the post-Pacific constitutions of Japan, how do you see the Tokyo can advance the long-term security through expanded international collaborations, and what potential do regional platforms like ASEAN can hold for supporting this integrated approach to global stability beyond the regional stability?
This pacifist constitution is crucial. Is very very crucial. I know the Japanese feels very uncomfortable right now being pacifist with the U.S. umbrella retreating, being retracting, but their pacifist constitution was an anchor for the peace in Southeast Asia and East Asia for the region, because Japan has this pacifist constitution. We have been spared for any kind of military sort of misadventure related to Japan. Japan, because of their technological prowess, can remilitarize very quickly. They have proven to be a very lethal fighting force. They can exact enormous harm and damage with their military superiority and power. So we have been at the receiving end of that. So it's kind of scary for us if the Kashi administration attempts to roll back or water down or weaken the pacifist constitution. And this talk about acquiring nuclear capability is also very, very, very worrying. It's going to not just cause a more unstable regional, but also a global regional situation. As you know, the nuclear treaty between U.S. and Russia has just ended, and there's no talk about renewing it. So there is almost a kind of a free for all nuclear armament right now across the globe, and countries like South Korea and uh, and Japan are also exploring possibilities of having nuclear weapons, and that's very, very worrying for us. I think it's very hard. You need to balance between their Japanese sense of vulnerability and then their need for remilitarization. But again, as I said, we just hope that uh, this is not the only focus. That the focus should also be on diplomacy. Focus should be on economic. Focus should be on the common good. Focus should be on building trust between the peoples in Southeast Asia and Japan, and also Japan and China and the wider region.
And Peter, just as a last comment, you told us about the past of Japan. We discussed the 2 days of Japan, and now there is a conservative prime minister with the landslide victory in election in Japan. And given the China's relations with its regions and in its activities around the Senkaku in the South China Sea, its relations with Taiwan and and with Philippines, do you think that China failed to convince Japan that its growing power is a peaceful power, and these two giant countries in the region can live together peacefully?
Yeah, I think you could for some people could read it. The fact that the tension has risen uh, need not always the blame should not always be on the Japanese. The blame should it's a failure of Chinese diplomacy in trying to convince the Japanese that their rise is a peaceful rise, that their rise is something that is non-threatening. Uh, yeah, maybe you would want to. We should also consider that maybe there are things that the Chinese side should have done differently that
Because
could
the
better
security
reassure the Japanese.
yeah, the security concern is a very valued concern for any nations. And then when you bringing all drivers behind the rising of a conservative nation party, then it come to mind whether the China is failed or not succeed to convince its neighbors that it is power or its activities is peaceful.
Yeah, I think China may have failed in some countries, but China may have been successful in other countries. Let's give Southeast
Yes,
Asia
in
an
Southeast
example.
Asia is another example.
Yeah, for example, Southeast Asia is a very good example, right? I mean, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines all have territorial disputes with China. But China managed to convince Malaysia and Vietnam, at least, to pursue a less confrontational approach to resolving the disputes. Malaysia and Brunei are on board with Chinese approach of trying joint collaboration, trying economic exploration, taking a much more long-term diplomatic approach to resolving it.
And
Vietnam in general has also.
Peter, just a small comment from my previous guest. We also discussed the
Mm,
similar topics, and when they compared Northeast Asia and Southeast Asian countries' approach toward China, they argued that yes, the Southeast Asian nations has using diplomacy more than Japan toward China, and they say because mainly because they don't have power as much as Japan has. What will be your take on this?
yeah, it's a relative. It's all on the perception of the countries in contention. How much they can go in terms of taking a hardline stand. Obviously, Japan is very different from the Southeast Asian countries. Japan was an economic power. Japan sees itself not as a quote unquote small country. Japan sees itself as a very strong middle power. You know, so it's a different game. You are right. So the Japanese does see differently. Southeast Asian different, but the Philippines is not exactly an economic power. But they were willing to stand toe to toe, especially under Marcos with the with the Chinese. So I'm not too sure that it's the relative strength of the countries could be an explanation for it. But there are other countries that seemingly relatively weak compared to China, very asymmetrical. The Philippines and the Chinese in terms of economic has no comparison at all. And yet, the Marcos administration seems to take on the challenge, wanting to stand toe to toe at the geopolitical level against the Chinese, obviously with the backing of the United States. Otherwise, they would not have done that. Yeah. So, coming back to your point about where did China go wrong? If China was able to, as I said, convince others, especially countries in the global south, that China's rise is benign, is relatively good. It's a safe rise, it's a peaceful rise. As I said in the other context, that most of the global south and Southeast Asia, Malaysia as well, generally see, but it has failed to convince some countries. Japan, for example, and the Philippines, an example, the Philippines Marcos administration in particular wasn't able to convince, but the Duterte administration has a different views altogether. And mind you, Japan too is divided. Takashi is very hardline, not convinced, but the other parties, more left and open progressive parties, are convinced with the Chinese. So sure, they might be the Chinese themselves may have to recalibrate their messaging, how they want to approach the much more hawkish and hardline Takashi's administration. They may need to review some of their strategies and approach to be able to win them over. So it's quite right. I may have painted it too one-sided that the blame is entirely on the Japanese side, but maybe the Chinese side may have to rethink some of their ways in which they can convince more towards the Japanese that the Chinese rise is peaceful and not threatening to the Japanese.
And there is another point come to mind. Is it possible to say now China facing with right wing oppositions in the region, like the Marcos, like the Takaichi, and then the United States as well. There is a three right wing political party at the power, and China facing with them. And the other opposite argument, yes, global South countries sees China as a benign and peaceful rise, but because they don't have territorial dispute with China, there is two clash arguments. How do you see this too?
Mm, okay, let's address first the rise of the far right, global rise a global phenomenon of the far right. Takashi, Trump. By the way, Thailand just had their election on Sunday as well, and it's a much more conservative party there, a more nationalistic party won, vis-a-vis the more open progressive party won, you know. Then the Philippines, I'm not too sure Marcos, you would describe Marcos as right, far right, but he's certainly nationalistic. Uh, yeah, there's a global movement. As I mentioned already, in Germany, ADF, and the UK Reform Party might win, So there are a lot of right-wing movements merging. And in Argentina, you see that coming up also.
Yes, there is a global trend.
It is a global trend. It is a global trend. It's a combination of many. The far right in the West is driven, in Japan is driven by immigration primarily. But the far right in Japan is immigration and also China. So that's another reason. And then sometimes the far right is driven by economics. Argentina is mainly driven by economics. The left has become too big government. So social safety net is so big, they're spending so much that the country has gone bankrupt. So they have to swing back to the right. So there are many factors that drives each country's move from the left to the right and that sort of thing. So yeah, that is another phenomena I think we got to begin to address in terms of a post-US, post-Western order. What is it? Is this going to be more centrist, left, right? We're not sure what it is. Okay, come on to the second question about those global South countries that has got no territorial disputes. Obviously, if they have got territorial disputes, then it will be a different story altogether. But then China's neighbors, by the way, China shares a lot of borders with a lot of neighbors. Okay, and really the only difficult neighbor that they have is really one is Japan, and the other one is, of course, is India. India, they have reached a kind of a truce for now. The border situation is very difficult, but Japan is already recovered a lot of it, and they had border dispute with Vietnam as well, and then of course the South China Sea that we have mentioned, right? So those border disputes are there. They can undermine the relationship, but then again, Malaysia is a good example. We have territorial disputes with them, but we generally see them as a net benefit. China rise has been a net benefit for us, Brunei as well. And I would say that Vietnam in general sees China rise as a net benefit also. And I would say, with the exception of the Marcos administration, broadly, Philippines also see China rise as a net benefit. So territorial dispute does undermines a little bit the perception, especially with the Japanese, but it doesn't explain all the disputes that they have with Japan, with China.
And thank you very much, Peter, for this insightful and great conversation. You spare your
Very good.
time and
Very
join
happy
my
to
show.
share.
Thank you very much. And for my friends, followers, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell for upcoming shows, and see you on the next live event. Stay tuned, please.